It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It's December 2023. We're approaching season 2 of Beneath the Helmet. And I just want to have a shout out to everyone who's listened to the podcast, who's liked and subscribed, commented and shared the posts, because the more posts and more sharing that happens through the BTH community, the bigger our audience will grow. And the messages that we all hear every time will get into the ears of more people around the world. So please, if I could ask anything for a holiday present, would be to share, like, comment, and make sure that your friends, your colleagues, those who might be suffering, become part of the BTH community. So today I get a chance to sit down with somebody that I don't know too much about the history of being a dispatcher. Honestly, I've known dispatchers. I've worked with dispatchers who are just incredible. They are kind of the first responder. And I truly feel that it's a great time to highlight what that career looks like and the impact that it has. So today I get a conversation with Deborah Green, who's a retired police dispatcher, and she's going to share her struggles through several, but there was one in particular, but several officer-related shootings. And she describes the day that her officer that was on duty that day that she was dispatching was shot and killed in the line of duty. So Deborah's going to share her story, share a little bit of insight about what it is like to be a dispatcher, and some of the things that she's used through her years to help her recovery from her post-traumatic stress as well. So I hope you enjoy this episode, a little insight to what dispatching is all about, and the personal journey of persevering through an officer-related shooting. Happy New Year to everyone. Until next time, stay well. All right, welcome back to Beneath the Helmet. Super excited to have Deborah Green with us today. She's going to fill us in on where she comes from and what brought her to where she is today. So welcome to the show, Deborah, and share
Thank
with our
you.
listeners a little bit about who
Oh my
is.
gosh, a little bit, 28 years of a little bit. Oh my gosh. So I'm from Northern California in the Sacramento County area. I joined the California Army National Guard back in 1986 as a communications technician, radio phone operator, repair person. Then along the way, I became a military police officer. I missed going to Desert Storm, but I did go to the LA riots, which was quite interesting in amongst itself. You don't usually get deployed in your own country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's incredible.
That was quite interesting just to see. I don't know if you would call it hostility, because some people weren't hostile, but just the animosity towards law enforcement at that time in that area was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall that. What do you remember? What year roughly that was?
1992.
92. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, about April, May, June, kind of. I was there for, I think it was 6 weeks. We were down there. So just kind of containing the riot, containing areas and getting them back to not normal, but at least peaceful, more peaceful than it was when we walked in there. So
right. Wow.
It was quite interesting. But at the time, I was also attending the Academy for Dispatchers for Sacramento Police Department. So I didn't get to finish the academy with everybody else. So when I came back, I went and finished up what I had missed, and then jumped right in, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I honestly don't know a lot of dispatchers. Through my fire world, I probably knew maybe less than 20, 25 dispatchers. But what is the process for going to school for that?
For the Dispatch Academy, you're basically going through the at the time it was a 2-week post, which is police officer standard training through California. So dispatchers had their own post academy to get certified to be a dispatcher. And then the Academy for Sacramento Police Department. So you're learning all the codes and learning how to take those calls before they actually send you into the center to do the calls.
Interesting.
Which is really nice. You know, it gives you a, rather than throwing you to the wolves.
Exactly. Yeah, that could be very stressful.
Yeah. So, and a lot of agencies have those. And in California, I don't know if it's nationwide, but in California for fire dispatchers, they have what's called EMD, or emergency medical dispatch, which they used to have cards back in the day that you would, flip through and ask specific questions. And that was just for liability purposes.
Right.
But I think it's all computerized now. And so you would go to school for that too.
So you went through becoming you did several positions. You went from police to military police, dispatch, and now you're retired. So what transpired between then and retirement?
Oh my gosh. So I spent 11 months with Sacramento Police Department, and they released me on probation because I was technically not fast enough for them to keep up with the traffic and the radio traffic. So I was released on probation. I immediately went to go look for other jobs because I had an academy under my belt. So that was, and I had also been post-certified. So people will take you with that certification over somebody just off the street, which is good. So I got hired with El Dorado County Sheriff's Office and kind of got thrown to the wolves, I guess you would say. It was a kind of night and day compared to Sacramento. When I went to El Dorado, they didn't have a dispatch manual. There wasn't any policies and procedures established. I got handed a binder with memos and other things in it and said, you need to learn all this. There's the Xerox machine. Go make yourself a copy.
Right.
So that was my first night, was doing that. And then learning the codes, because their codes were different, from agency to agency, and then learning their CAD system. Their luckily, the CAD system was very similar.
Oh, good.
So it wasn't too bad to switch over.
Mm-hmm.
But, just years and years and years of critical incidents, just the normal law enforcement calls you would take, I guess. I don't know what would be considered normal, but, the varied soup to nut, lots of shooting calls throughout my career where we shot the bad guys up until 2007. And then we had 3 officers that were shot at a call, which was quite interesting. Getting woken up from that, because I work graveyards and it happened during the day. And so everybody that was watching the news that day was calling me, trying to find out what happened. It's like, guys, I'm sleeping. So, going
Did they
in.
survive or?
Yeah, all 3 of them survived, which
Good.
was wonderful. But, it takes a toll on you. One of them continued with the department. One of them went to the DA's office. The other, she kind of struggled for a while. I'm not sure if she was fired or quit from the department. But she eventually committed suicide. So that was rather sad. And, just kind of dealing with that and other shootings as they came along. And then finally in 2019, we were working and I had an officer involved shooting where my deputy was shot and killed.
Oh, jeez. Oh,
while
and you were working.
While I was working that channel. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was kind of the end, the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess you would say, because when you're adding all these traumas and layering them, you finally get to the point where you can't do it anymore. So
Totally.
I lasted about a year, and then my psychiatrist signed me off and said, you're not working anymore.
Right.
And then I finally retired in June of 2021.
What kind of support did you get personally when you were in that year time span?
From the department, they tried to do as much as they could. They were very supportive, with the exception of the supervisor that I had, who I don't know if she didn't understand or just didn't want to understand, or if I was a threat to her. I don't know, but I I was micromanaged to a point where I was doubting what I was doing, and thus creating anxiety and depression, and just taking all of that on a traumatized person anyway. And it didn't work out. And then we had COVID along with it. So in October 2019, you're trying to get help and get out and get help, and then you're locked down in a room for, you know, when you're off duty, you're at home. You
Right.
can't go out, you can't do much of anything. So, that takes a toll on you also.
When there's
So
a
we
police
just
involved shooting as a dispatcher, are you involved in the post-incident review or anything like that? Or how does that play out? Like, are you
um
involved in the investigation after the fact?
I was investigated.
Mm,
I wasn't, because they have to pull the tapes and they have to make sure that what I did was according to procedure.
right,
So that's the first thing they did. When the um so the department doesn't investigate itself.
right,
In that type of situation, you have other agencies that come in, at least for our department. So we had South Lake Tahoe Police Department, Placerville Police, the district attorney's office, and I believe there was one other agency that came over and sent people to do investigations. So what they did was, first off, there was a team that pulled all the tapes and listened to everything and made sure it was according to policy. So I was cleared immediately within 2 or 3 days,
right.
which was nice. As far as any of the other involvement, I wasn't involved at all. And
Okay.
luckily I didn't have to do any testifying in court either. They just used the tapes.
Right. Nice. Do you feel comfortable enough to kind of paint a little bit of a picture of how that day transpired, or want
Well,
to?
it's an interesting day. So and like I said, I work graveyards. So my shift started at 7 p.m. The deputy that was shot and killed, Brian Ishmael, his shift started a little later that night because of just how the shifts were. Um, so he started, and I had caught him in the hallway before he went out, and had talked to him and joked around with him while I was on my break walking around the building. Um, then he goes out. I dispatched him to the call along with 2 cover units at about, I think it was about 12:45, 1 o'clock in the morning. As soon as I dispatched them, the sergeant had called me and said, "Make sure there's 3 units going," and whatnot, because it was a call about a marijuana grow and possibly prowlers in the marijuana grow. It being October, it's what we call harvest season around here. So they weren't sure if somebody was in there trying to steal the guy's plants or what was going on, because at the time, you could have up to 12 plants personal growing in your yard. We didn't know how big the grow was. It was rather large when we finally found out about it. So I sent them out. I went on a break, and during my breaks, I would walk around the building, out in the parking lot, just to get some exercise and air. And on my way back, I got a text message from the lead saying, "We need you back in here." I walked in, and my partner goes, "They have shots fired." And so I just sat down, threw my headset on, and took over from that. Um, I could hear, through a couple of transmissions, I could hear shots being fired. Um, we lost communication with Brian Ishmael, and we were asking him if he could hear us to click his mic, because he might have been in a tactical position and couldn't make any noise. We got nothing.
Mm,
Um, then I finally learned that they were able to get him out, and we had sent an ambulance down during all of this because we had the world going at that time once the shots are fired. And I had heard that they had got him out and got him on an ambulance, and he was on his way to the hospital. So at that time, you're thinking, okay, he's with professionals. He's with the medics. He's on his way to the hospital. He's going to be fine. You set that aside in your little box, and you're going to worry about that later.
Right.
And so we just kept going and trying to get the suspects in this. I think we finally caught the second suspect about 4:30 in the morning. In between then, Deputy Ishmael had passed. The way we found out was not the nicest way to find out. So we had learned that somebody at the hospital had posted on Facebook that he had died. One of the admin people who was at the hospital found out about that. And instead of going through procedure to, like, they would have sent somebody to the office to tell us, he called up because he didn't want us reading Facebook and finding out that way.
Wow.
So then my lead comes over and tells me. And so I'm going about 2 hours worth of crying while I'm dispatching, but not letting the guys out on the field know what was going on. Because they had a mission to do out there. And my job was to keep as calm as possible to get them to the end goal and then worry about, everything else later.
Wow. That must have been extremely challenging to keep
It
it all
was
together.
I wasn't actually. The chaplain was behind me and she's going, "I don't know how you're doing it," because I was literally just I was sobbing. But when they had a transmission, I would, pull it together for those 2 seconds to talk to them and then, continue. But,
Wow.
I recorded everything like I was supposed to. I got things done like I was supposed to. Everything that they heard out there in the field was what they should have heard. Meanwhile, I'm at the office just falling apart.
Wow. I'm sorry for your loss there. That must have been a challenging day.
It was the worst day of my life. It really was.
So in the fire world, something like that occurs. Usually that station would be browned out or blacked out and taken off.
Right.
The firefighters would be able to go and have some peer discussions or diffusing or debriefing. But it sounds like you had to remain active for the remainder of your shift. Has that changed, or is that still the situation?
Well, no, at 4:30, my relief was standing behind me.
Oh,
and
I
she
got you.
relieved me as soon as, but I was not getting off that. I refused to get off the radio until they caught the second suspect.
Gotcha.
Which was my choice. But after that, I went down and sat in a stairwell for about a half an hour and just cried my little heart out. But we did have an initial critical stress. I don't know if it wasn't a whole debrief, but it was just, getting everybody into one room and saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to send you home. We're going to do this. It was the day after that we came back and did a whole stress debrief with our shift.
Right.
And
That's good.
What they did was, in years past, they had put all of us together. So the patrol guys, dispatch, any SWAT people, sergeants, everybody was all in the same room doing the debrief. This time it was the patrol units, dispatch, SWAT. They each had their own smaller debrief, which was more targeted for that specific group, which was nice.
Like I said before, I honestly don't know a lot of dispatchers. I've been in the fire service for 24 years, and I had one dispatcher my whole career. Not one dispatcher, one dispatch center. So, 20, 30 people I've probably met over time, and I don't have any close friends who are just strictly in dispatch. I'd love to hear kind of what a standard day would look like for you and how that's different than being on the front lines. Maybe from a lens of your own self-care, mental health, of being so far away from the action, but still in the action.
It's very different, and I know many people probably disagree with my setting on this, but it's kind of like watching I don't know, like a video game in your head.
Mm.
So you've got a CAD screen, you have calls for service, you have units. So you're putting those units on the calls for service, and you have to imagine what's going on in your mind because you're not actually visually seeing any of this. So, so on a day I'd come in, put my stuff away, grab my coffee, go get briefed by the person I was relieving. We weren't assigned if we were working radio or phones when we got in. It was just we kind of agreed upon ourselves who was doing what for the week. But as long as we worked the busy radio at least one day during our work week.
What's a busy radio like? How many calls would you have?
Oh my gosh.
24? Were you working
So,
24 hours or 10?
We worked 12s.
12s? Yeah, okay.
So you come in the busy radio, depending on what shift. So graveyard, when I would come in, granted it's, 7 p.m. So it's a busier time of day.
Right.
So we would have maybe 12 patrol units for half the county. So our busy radio was from what we called West Slope Radio. And then we had Tahoe. Because our county went from Sacramento County all the way to the Nevada border.
Hmm.
And Tahoe had its own radio channel, so they only had 3 deputies a shift up there, which was nice. So I'd be working with 12 deputies, have all sorts of other units on, canines. Maybe you'd have a few detectives. You had animal control on your board. Forest Service every once in a while, state parks every once in a while, because we did everything. We went from urban to rural, extreme rural, national forest kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So we had a lot of different units. So I maybe have 20, 25 units on when I sat down, and maybe 10 calls for service pending, 5 or 6 calls going on, depending on the priority and how many units you needed on each call, and just kind of go from there. Plus, if you're working the busy radio, you were answering phone calls if everybody else was on a phone call. So I could be doing traffic stops and priority calls and have to answer a phone call at the same time.
Okay.
So
Wow. What's the number one skill you need as a dispatcher?
multitasking would be a good one. Knowing how to
Yes.
hear 2 things out of 2 different ears. So yeah, that was quite the
Okay.
skill.
Jeez.
Yeah.
We can barely hear each other talking in a fire, let alone 2 different people talking in my ear.
Well, yeah. So you've got the radio in one ear and the phone in the other ear, and then you're also listening to the room around you because you never know what's going on with with your partners answering calls and stuff. I can remember when I was doing phones one night, and the lady says he's got a gun. So you kind of go, and where's that gun? You kind of like do the room so everybody knows. Oops, we got one coming in.
Right. So that must be pretty, I don't know, stressful, kind of brewing some anxiety about knowing that there's a very challenging situation going on. And you are very intimate with the caller or the person calling in or your police officers or whatever that looks like, but you are not there. You're painting that picture. Do you tend to go to the dark places right away, or like
Um,
how is that? Because it just seems like a real struggle to be
you
like,
you
I know for the
develop
fire service, when we get rid of a patient, take them to the hospital, we never know their outcome. And for us, that
right,
kind of weighs a bit on us. It's like, how did they turn out? The work we did it help them?
right.
I imagine it's very similar to dispatcher where you kind of
It's
hang up
very
and
similar. You don't
yeah,
know the outcome of a lot of things. But um, because we were technically a smaller department, even though we had all these cops out there, um, our dispatch center was close to where the patrol guys were.
mm,
So they'd come up and visit a lot. So we could, and, especially if we had a critical call, a lot of them would come up and tell us what went on,
Right.
which was nice. So, we knew what some of it, but there's a lot that you just kind of like, okay, you dispatch it, you clear the call. Okay, let's go on to the next and, hope for the best.
When you said you were answering phones, is that like 911 kind of calls coming
Oh
in?
yeah.
Or
So
is that, so
we
you're
had,
running 911 as well?
so yeah, we had 911, emergency lines, non-emergency lines, business lines. So there was a lot of phones. So we had,
Yeah.
28, 30 plus lines.
That's amazing.
And there'd only be 4 of us working the shift. So yeah, it would get crazy some nights.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you and all the dispatchers out there in the world for sure.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's an amazing job and I loved what I did. It was awesome.
That's good. So as a dispatcher, there's obviously some major stress you experience. There's trauma that you're experiencing vicariously through the telephone line. You're talking somebody 911 and, their child's choking or their mother's in the upstairs apartment, the house is on fire, all these different things can happen. So what does Deborah do for her own mental health care? And maybe what could you have done better as a dispatcher, maybe back in the day?
I had a lot of hobbies.
Mm.
So I knit, I sew, I now paint, which is kind of fun. I learned many, many years ago that after a critical incident, going out and running or taking a walk kind of helped reduce all of that adrenaline that you had going on there and made the come down a lot easier. I don't know how else, because when you've got that adrenaline, you're just up and you're tense and you're there. And if you don't do anything to kind of bring yourself down and get rid of that adrenaline, you have like an adrenaline dump and it just kind of like, you feel like you're hungover. So going out and exercising after an incident like that helped me quite a bit. I could tell the difference between my first officer involved shooting and my second officer involved shooting, where I started walking and exercising in between the 2 of them. And the second one I dealt with a lot better than I did the
Oh.
first one.
And the second one was the last one you did?
No, this
Oh, yeah.
was, oh my gosh.
You had a few.
I've had many.
Oh, wow.
My first one, I didn't know if the deputy had gotten injured or not until the next day. So I was upset and crying and, I just didn't know what was going on. There was and this was back in the 90s. There wasn't peer support. There wasn't critical incident stress debriefings. There wasn't mental health care. It was just suck it up and come back tomorrow.
For sure.
Nowadays, you have the peer support and all of that to help you through it. So having an outlet, like a hobby or something, always helps. Exercise is very important. And I started in therapy because of I had open heart surgery to replace a faulty valve in my heart. And when you're put on bypass, some people develop what's called post-perfusion syndrome, which kind of affects your brain and amplifies a lot of issues you might have had that you didn't realize you had. So my depression and my anxiety just went out of control. So I went into therapy then. So having therapy and being in therapy and having those tools when I had my final incident really helped. I don't know what I would have done had I not had those tools already. I think
Yeah.
I would be a lot worse.
For sure. Yeah, it's good you had them kind of already established and kind of utilizing them, right? And building a relationship with them. Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I did when I got home that next morning was call and make an emergency therapy appointment. And then a friend of mine was a peer support person. And so after my therapy appointment, I drove about a mile to where where I went to therapy at. She worked at another dispatch center over there. And so I called her up and said, hey, can we talk? And I'd had another, couple hours of therapy there. So that was nice. I had a good dose of it.
Yeah, the power of peer support is pretty potent in our own self-care. It's pretty incredible how we can reflect and talk openly to another peer, even if it's could be a firefighter or a paramedic that you're talking to, but even they just know the world that we live in, right?
Right. It's so much nicer because as much as my family understands and my husband understands, because they lived with me for, almost 30 years doing this job, it wasn't the same as just having somebody that was another dispatcher that could kind of help and direct, and it was
sure.
a big help.
So you started therapy in 2015. Is this something you still continue to do, and peer
Yes.
support? And As a
Not so much peer support. When I finally announced my retirement, I kind of became a persona non grata. I don't know if that's it. Just the department just kind of cut all ties with me
Right.
when I finally announced it. And when you're retiring because of PTSD, that's not the kind of thing that your department should be doing.
Right. So how was your last day? Was it just like a farewell, or was it like a retirement party?
There was no party. Nobody.
It was like you just were there and then gone.
Yeah, I walked in, had my grandson with me because I had been watching him while I was off, and so I took him up there with me, kind of my emotional support kid. Walked in and turned in my ID and turned in my key card, and that was pretty much it. I was in the building, so they allowed me to walk around still and say goodbye to people, but yeah, there was no fanfare,
It wasn't
nothing.
it wasn't the vision you had for your retirement.
No, it was not. I had planned to retire in 2024, and yeah, so I fell short a bit.
For our listeners right now, there's probably lots that are considering retirement in the next 1 or 2 years. How was the transition for you, and any tips you can share with the listeners
Oh my
on the
gosh.
transition?
Well, I kind of so when the psychiatrist signed me out, I was still an employee. So I was still, doing 12-hour shifts and things like that. And then she said, nope, no more. So I didn't know how long I would be out, how long she would allow me to be out. So what I did was, for my own self-preservation, I put myself on a schedule. And I was up at the time, I was up at 8:00 in the morning. I made sure to go and take a walk outside every day, just to get out in the sunshine. You're sitting inside because of COVID still. And so it was like, I need to be out. So that's what I did. And I, just threw my podcasts on. I have all sorts of different subjects that I listen to, and
Beneath the
tried
helmet.
to beneath the helmet now. But I have all sorts of just soup to nuts kind of fun stuff. But I stayed away from the self-help stuff. I just wanted to get my brain away from what I needed, away from work, away from law enforcement. I just focused on the fun stuff that I was listening to. Get out there, clean my house. Let's see. I was watching my grandson a couple days a week at the time. So that helped a lot. It got me out of the house. He'd go with me on my walks and stuff. He was, when I started watching him, he was about 3 months old. So he's now almost 3.
Nice. Much better walking age.
And yes, now he can walk with me instead of pushing him around, which is nice.
Yeah.
But having stuff to do, if you're retiring and have plans, that's a good thing. A lot of people retire from law enforcement and they go into something else. A lot of cops maybe go into construction or that I know of that, they would like go and do something completely different. But having that plan is always good. Having that plan, don't just retire and go, I'm just going to sit around the house. Because when
crazy.
you've been a cop or a firefighter for 30 years, you can't just sit around.
So having a plan.
Having a plan is always a good thing. And for those people starting out, get a therapist within the first year.
Yes. Or already.
Start
Get one tomorrow.
down. Get one tomorrow. Have that. Learn those tools that you're going to need to cope with what you're seeing. Get a therapist that knows first responders, knows trauma. Because I went through three therapists before I found one that she fits me pretty good.
Yeah. And that's really how it should be, right? It's like, just like selecting anybody else you're going to work with very intimately. You don't just pick the first one that comes. You pick one that you work with, right? So
yeah, but learn the tools for depression. Learn the tools for anxiety. I'm lucky enough to have Kaiser medical insurance down here in California, and they have an all around kind of thing. So they offer classes too.
Okay.
So I was able to take depression classes, anxiety classes, which not at the time, back in 2015, got me out of the house around other people that weren't law enforcement and allowed me to kind of express what was going on, without freaking people out because, the general public doesn't understand what we see and hear every day.
Yeah.
But allowed me to get those tools and utilize them. And, I've got like a binder up here with all my
What's your
my
go-to
handouts.
tool?
Yes, my go-to tool, I breathe.
Nice.
I just stand there and breathe and think and because once I go into a panic attack, it's hard to think. And so if I can catch it before, and just start breathing, I can think my way through it. There was one when we first moved into our house here. So I was having all these panic attacks, just new house and new bills, and I had accidentally paid the county $21,000 for my utility bill.
Must have been a hot summer.
Oh my gosh. And so I was panicking what to do because it's like, all my money is gone. There's no money in my account anymore. What's going on? But luckily they caught the problem and, we were able to reverse it. But oh my gosh. Yeah. So I started panicking and the first thing I did was I just calling my husband, call your husband, get him on the phone. And he was able to at least walk me down a bit. So that I could call the utility company and get that straightened out. And what was nice was when I called the utility company, one of their operators was actually going to school to be a therapist. So she was talking me down too, because I had to explain to her, I'm going through a panic attack right now. And so I'm going to be crying and I'm upset. It's not you, it's me. Yeah, that was
a panic attack would be just pure anxiety.
Pure anxiety, hyperventilating. And you're so tense and you can't focus. All you're seeing is all the bad things just rolling around in your brain and you can't get them to stop and you can't focus and it's not fun.
So we talked about your self-care toolkit, which is definitely something I want to talk about. You mentioned in retirement phase about having peer support help, or at least help for retirees. Where do you think we're missing a gap there on helping retirees through their journey of transition but also mental health, physical health.
Well, you have two kinds of, well, maybe three, three kinds of retirees. You have the retiree that's been there 30 years and everything's hunky dory and we're transitioning out, we're going to go do something else, or we're going to travel or whatever. You have that one. Then you have the medical retiree who's forced out due to something physical. Whether it's, broken bones, back is always a big one or whatever. And then you have the mental health ones, which we're finally starting to recognize the mental health, which 10 years ago, it was, you just kind of wrote people off as soon as they went crazy. We don't want to talk to them. We don't want to. Those are the ones that we need to help the most, because that transition from active duty into retirement, if they're not getting that consistent help that they need down the road, we're going to lose them to suicide. We're going to lose them to just, I think suicide's the biggest one, but you're going to lose them to alcoholism, to drug addiction, to whatever.
Yep.
And that's something that I think we're failing as first responders, as agencies, is that continued care for those mental health retirements.
What could you have used in your first couple of years of retirement that you didn't get that would have been really beneficial?
Just maybe a check-in once a month. Somebody that would check in, just call and say, hey, how's it going? Are you going to therapy? Are you doing this? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? How are you holding up? What, anything we can do to help would have been, they did manage to get me, while I was out on workman's comp, to a retreat, which was nice, trauma retreat.
That's good.
And I think that needs to be done more, and if you have the intention of possibly helping that person and maybe returning them back to active duty, whether it's, law enforcement, fire, dispatch, even veterans, getting to a retreat and getting that care is very beneficial. And the agencies need to look at that. And, that $5,000 for that whole week is minimal expense as to what that person's going to do down the road if they're, when they sue you.
Yep. And also it's, I know, unfortunately, the dollar speaks louder than most things, but
Oh my gosh, yes.
30 years of service, there's got to be some protection for when they transition in retirement. I think that'd be amazing. I don't know if that day will ever come, but I think that would be priceless if there was better support for retirees after
There's got to
dedicating
be
30 years. Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, and you have these retirees that know a lot. Why not bring them back as consultants every once in a while?
Mhm.
Hey, so and so used to do that. Hey, let's bring them in. Use your retirees for good.
Mhm.
And I was talking to the people at First Help. I said, there's so many of us that are retired that want to help out that have no direction
Mhm.
as to what we can help with. I'm contacting all these groups to see what can I do to help. And I finally found my little niche right now is going to podcasts and getting my story out there and saying, hey, we need to do better.
Yeah, for sure. As we wrap up today, what's one nugget that really you'd love our listeners to learn from you about your story, or about some message that you want to make sure it gets through to every single listener today?
We all are not leaving this job without something. There's some sort of little trauma that we all will have when we leave, and just being able to acknowledge that and take care of ourselves
Which
and
lends back to having a therapist now versus
exactly
when you when crunch time, right?
Yeah, and the time is over for sucking up buttercup, and we need to really recognize that that suppressing everything down deep is more harmful than it is to just talk about it and get help for it.
That's great. I 100% agree with that. Have you seen any changes in your stations that you were at improving on any mental health, or is it kind of still the same
Um,
as it was?
I went in for coworker's retirement in when did we go in? In April? March. March. And I asked one of the newer gals that was there, who had been there when I was there, and I asked her just candidly, is it getting better? And she said, yeah,
Oh,
it's
good.
getting
Good.
much better.
Yeah,
So
it's not really you want to hear that whatever happened to you is kind of making change, but if you look on the bright side, whatever happened to myself, whatever happened to you is making change and might not have been comfortable to go through the time or now still even, but that's
no,
how we
it's
progress. That's how we progress. Yes.
exactly,
Yeah.
and I'm doing better, but there's still a lot to go.
Kudos for you for being brave enough to share your story, because I think that's the biggest way we're going to make change is to share our stories. The biggest way
Exactly.
we're going to make change is to address it versus make it a stigma that we don't talk about. And I think mental health is just a part of our well-being. It doesn't mental health has a bit of a stigma attached to it that when you say mental health, there's something wrong with your health. Why don't we start looking at mental health as being healthy? So we have a healthy mind.
Well, exactly. You work out for your physical health, so we need to do something else for our mental health to keep everything in balance.
Exactly. Everyone should be concentrating on their mental health. Like first responders set aside, everyone should be working on their mental health.
Yes, exactly.
So what's one question I did not ask you that you wanted me to ask you?
I don't know.
That's one of my questions that I ask everyone.
I don't know. There's I just kind of let it go and see what, I mean, there's all sorts of things that, you did ask about my cooking skills, I think.
Yep. Your butter chicken.
My butter chicken.
Well,
I know
hopefully
my heart.
over time, I'm going to collect a bunch of them and put together a podcast cookbook. So that's kind of the game plan. So
Oh, see, that's awesome. Yeah, I do one heck of a Indian butter chicken, and my husband loves it.
I
So,
love it too. I'll have to hunt you down for the recipe because all you said was butter chicken.
oh yeah, well, it's all up here.
Nice.
But my husband knows when I make it because he'll see the whipping cream in the fridge and the naan on the counter. So
Nice.
he knows
Beautiful.
what's coming for dinner.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Deborah, to chat with you and to learn a little bit about the inside world of being a dispatcher. I feel dispatchers don't get the recognition as much as other first responders. So I just want to recognize that I know the ones that I counted on for 2 decades, I could not have survived without them on the other line, supporting me, guiding me, having my back, making sure there's timers on and making sure that I was safe out there on the field as well. So I just want to kudos to you as well as all the other dispatchers across the world that I believe deserve a big round of applause. So thank you for
Yes,
your
they
hard
do.
work. Thanks for your hard work. And thanks for being brave for sharing your message tonight.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do so.
Awesome.
It's great.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Deborah Green, until next time, stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.